everyone, welcome to Sherpodcast this week. I have a really, really special first guest ever, Mr. Bob Stone. I'm going to call him Bob because we're close like that. But first of all, Bob, you have to put on a Sherpa to enter into the Sherpa world.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Here, no, I'll come to you.
Okay.
Just, once you get in the Sherpa, it's like a cloak of safety. It will make you feel comfortable and at ease.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
You got it?
I got it.
Isn't it nice?
Yeah. I'll have to get me one of these.
I know. It's like they make men's. Well, this is kind of unisex, to be honest. But.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm
ready. Are you
ready.
comfortable?
Yeah, I'm comfortable. Fine.
All right. Well, just to give a brief introduction, Bob Stone has done so many things. He just informed me, I knew he was a Kentucky colonel, but he's also a Louisiana colonel. He was born in Pineville, Kentucky, but came to Florida in, the 1970s?
1963.
1963. And he has done so many amazing things in the legal community and really the Vero Beach community. He's really a treasure of the community. He was the legal advisor to the 5th and 6th statewide grand juries. He served on both Governor Graham and Governor Askew's Organized Crime Council. He was twice elected for the president of the Florida Prosecuting Attorneys Association, and he was the statewide speaker for both Governor Graham and Governor Askew in opposition of cocaine trafficking and organized gambling. He was also the elected state attorney for the 19th Judicial Circuit starting in 1972. So I met Bob when I was a prosecutor, when I started my career as a prosecutor in 2013. And Bob has been a defense attorney for some time now, but he is so much fun to work with in the courtroom. Just watching his skills, and there's really no one else like Bob, to be honest.
Yeah, a lot of people happy about that.
But he really is, not only is he a great, mentor, someone to talk to, he's seen every side of the legal community. He knows everybody. He hired a lot of the judges at the state attorney's office. But he is not only a great legal mind, but he's hysterical. There's no one more fun to spend the breaks. We have long, long court days sometimes, and it's so much fun, talking to Bob in the breaks.
Well, it's always fun to talk to you too, Sam. You all those things fit you pretty good.
I know, and I miss being a prosecutor so much, so it's just awesome to have Bob here because I've really missed him. And full disclosure, I'm really his daughter, who is an assistant state attorney, Robin. I'm very, very close with her. She's one of my best friends, so that's kind of how I pulled the weight to get Bob on the show today. But there's a couple crimes in our circuit, which includes Vero Beach, Fort Pierce, and Okeechobee, that I was surprised when I moved here and started at the state attorney's office that I didn't know more about. And once I learned more about them, I was shocked that, they weren't more infamous. We've heard Ted Bundy's so overdone. There's so many documentaries on him. How much more do we need to know about Ted Bundy? But the case that I wanted to discuss today, the Fred Waterfield and David Allen Gore homicides, are almost, at least equally as brutal and really unknown. Even when I was doing some research for this case, I found maybe one book and another podcast, like a very obscure podcast that had done some research on it. So, when I first started the state attorney's office in 2013, David Gore had been executed by the state in 2012. So people were still talking about it a lot. And, I would get bits and pieces of stories and information from Bob in court or from his daughter, Robin, telling me his experiences, but it's such a fascinating case. And Bob was the prosecutor. He was the state attorney who prosecuted these men for their crimes. And, I thought, who better to talk to about the case than the lead prosecutor? So just to give you all a quick background on the case, Fred Waterfield and David Gore were cousins. And how many people do you think were living here in the 1970s, Bob, in Vero Beach?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Probably maybe about half of what we got now.
Right.
I'm not sure how many, but
yeah,
it was a much smaller community.
It was very small, and for those of you that don't live in Vero Beach, it's already a small community now, but at that time there were a lot more dirt roads. I mean, the orange groves were they were not a very populated place. We were mainly like a little citrus town, right?
Right, and actually the A1A was not open all the way to Fort Pierce.
Oh, wow.
You could only go down near the moorings, and it was a dirt road from there on. So anyway, Waterfield and Gore were cousins, and they were teenagers in the late 60s, early 1970s. They were maternal cousins, and when you're reading the books and the cases on them, they bonded over their strange sexual fantasies, which were very violent and included, bondage and rape of women. And I don't know really how, that comes up, that bonds you, but that's what happened. And it kind of escalated from there. The first, I think Gore confessed that the first really rape that they did together was of his own sister, Wendy. He held her down while he let his cousin rape her. And that just shows you the kind of demented psyche that these two were working with. And the first known murder that they committed was in 1981 with the two Ling women. So, Bob, do you want to tell us kind of how this whole saga started? Well, the Ling women lived out west of town. It was a mother and daughter, and they were from Taiwan. And they one day went missing, and nobody, never heard from them. They just were missing. And they didn't have really any family here at all. Mm-hmm. But someone had seen them and Gore together at one point. But that case incidentally happened actually before I got involved in the case. I'm just telling you, probably know more about how it happened than I do. But all I know is they were missing, and Gore was a major suspect. But there was no way we could tie him to him. And first, we didn't have any bodies, and we had no idea. They could have gone back to Taiwan for all we knew. But everybody was suspicious, especially law enforcement, that somehow or other David Gore was responsible for their disappearance. And that's how he became sort of somebody that they watched. And then after that, there was a lady who went in the doctor's clinic, and when she came out, she saw something around her car that was suspicious. Gore had gotten in her car and gotten in the back seat, so that when she got in it, he raised up, and his intent was, of course, to, I'm sure, take her out and rape her and kill her eventually.
And this is Marilyn Owens, right?
Yeah, but fortunately that didn't happen. They caught him. And
yeah, I guess what I read is that there happened to just be a sheriff's deputy and close in the vicinity also leaving the doctor.
Right, at the doctor's
So he
clinic.
heard her scream, and then they find Gore without a shirt, with handcuffs, vodka, and, his handgun in the back seat.
Yeah, I think he used to drink vodka or alcohol of some kind. We know it was pretty much vodka, because on the one case where we prosecuted him on the Elliott case, he had an empty bottle of vodka in the back of his
his car. So I don't know whether he did it for courage or what, but he usually would get about, I'd probably get totally sauced and then commit his crimes.
And now with the Ling disappearance of the Ling women, at that time, David Gore was known as something called an auxiliary deputy, which we don't really have these days very often. And I'll let Bob, what's an auxiliary deputy?
An auxiliary deputy is sort of like a trainee. He's a volunteer. He's not really, he doesn't have arrest powers. He rides around with the deputies and helps them out, and I used to say they were gophers, but they're just somebody that's interested in it, that likes that kind of work, and wants to help out, and so they volunteer as an auxiliary, and they have a uniform. They get a uniform. They get a badge. They get an ID. They don't carry a gun, and they don't have arrest powers.
But so Gore had a badge and
he had a badge, a uniform, and occasionally he would actually drive a marked cruiser, police car.
Right. So at that time, did anyone suspect he was using his? I mean, now we know that he used his position as an auxiliary deputy to lure women, but at the time, did people suspect he was doing that?
No, excuse me, other than Phil Redstone, it was just something about this case that just, he had an inkling for it.
And who is Phil Redstone?
He was a deputy sheriff. He's a chief of police in Orchid, the town of Orchid. Yeah. And he's really a sharp detective. And he suspected Gore of being a serial killer way back when nobody knew what a serial killer was.
Right. I mean, this is still the 70s, so this is just when this stuff is starting to kind of emerge.
Right.
Really in the 60s, and, this wasn't happening.
No, what was happening was nobody just ever caught anybody or linked anybody to several murders, because in the 60s there were several in South Florida that in Broward County and South Palm Beach County, there were several women that were missing, and which I later prosecuted the guy who killed those girls, but nobody tied them to any one person or considered that they were in any way linked to any kind of serial killing or anything of that nature.
Right.
So it was unusual. Serial killer was just something that nobody talked about.
And there was no profiling unit or anything like that to rely on. Was there any other law enforcement involved at this time?
Well, no, not really. Some detectives from the Vero Beach Police Department also were active in the case. An investigator named David Carter was involved, and several others. But there were 2 or 3 deputy sheriffs in addition to Redstone. Jimmy Atkinson was involved, and Calvin Jones, and several of those guys that are sort of legends in a way on their own that are not working now. But Redstone was the main guy.
Right.
No question about it.
So at this time, we know now, later on, that Gore and Waterfield had kind of developed this MO.
Right.
Modus operandi, which means, their plan of action, really what they did to lure, sexually assault, and then murder these victims. And really, Gore was kind of the brawn, I guess, behind it.
He had a good guy, bad guy routine.
Yes.
And in the case that we prosecuted Gore for and got the death penalty, the one he was executed for, which was Lynn Elliott. Lynn Elliott and her friend Reagan Martin were hitchhiking over to the beach, and Gore and Waterfield picked them up and drove them over to the beach, but they never made it to the beach. They went off into some area over there, sort of a grown over area.
And it might seem weird now because obviously nowadays nobody, I would never consider hitchhiking or like let my kids hitchhike. But was it common back then?
Oh yeah, it was common. In fact, that's how they picked up the Byers and the Valley Girl out of Orlando. They were hitchhiking on Orange Blossom Trail, and they picked them up. And what they would do is Gore would always be the bad guy. At first they took him off into a remote area and they smoked marijuana, and then Gore pulled a gun out of his glove compartment, and that's when he started letting them know that they weren't going to get away and he was going to take them back to his house. So Waterfield tried to calm it down, took the gun away from him, put it up, and was getting them at ease because they thought Waterfield would, protect them. He wasn't like that. He wasn't going to let this happen. But that was part of their modus operandi. Waterfield was the good guy. He'd get their confidence, and Gore was the bad guy.
And I also read that Fred really had a type, like he liked like young blonde girls. So, for example, with the Ling murders, he wasn't too thrilled when Gore, called him and said, I have these two women. They weren't really, they were Taiwanese. They weren't blonde. They weren't his type.
No, that's right.
But I heard that he would pay Gore like $1,000 or $1,500 for every woman that...
Well, we never confirmed that, but that was a rumor, and... But that didn't make any difference.
Right, it didn't, but it was just odd.
It was odd. And Waterfield was smarter, too, much smarter.
And that's the point. A lot of people have said, Waterfield was like the brains behind this. I mean, and when you think about it, it's like he's not really doing any of the dirty, he's sexually assaulting them, but...
Yeah, in the case involved with the Elliott girl, again, the one that he was executed for, when he got back to the house, they blindfolded them or put something over their head. I don't know what it was, and the girls never saw Waterfield involved in anything. Actually saw him. They knew he was there, of course. And then he left to go home and when he came back, but while he was gone is when the Elliott girl got away and Gore chased her down and shot and killed her.
So just going chronologically, we have the Ling disappearance. And that's anyone, in the community at this time, the community knew that the Ling women had disappeared.
Right.
So then the next known victim is Judy K. Daly.
Right.
Not that long after, in 1981. Right. She was a mother visiting. I think she was from this area originally.
Yeah, I think she was visiting from California.
Yes, visiting from California.
She was related to the Sextons.
Yes, and that's who, yes. And she had gone to Round Island Beach for the day. She dropped her two girls off at a different beach and then gone to Round Island to kind of have some peace and quiet. And Gore just happened to be he would drive up and down the beaches, kind of stalking these women. And Gore ended up disabling her car so that when she came out, from the beach with her beach chair, he just happened to be driving by as an auxiliary deputy at the time.
Right.
So he, pretended to be this good guy helping her.
Right.
But he then ended up obviously taking her into the orange groves, and he called Waterfield, who met him there, and they both sexually assaulted her, and then Gore ended up dismembering her, killing her, dismembering her, and I think this is the woman that he said he fed to the alligators.
Well, he decapitated her.
Yes.
And threw her torso, her body, into the canal and buried her head in the orange groves.
So at the time when she goes missing, is anyone concerned at this, that there's another woman missing?
Well, everybody was concerned that knew about it and read about it. Again, there was suspicion it was Gore. I don't know, something happened that indicated that he was involved in some way.
Well, I think at this time we'd already had the Owens woman.
Right.
Who...
The Owens woman and the two Taiwanese.
Mm-hmm.
The missing, they had suspected it. And Gore let her make a phone call. And I can't remember exactly, but it's been, 83? It's 30-some years ago.
He called her mom and said she was having car trouble and wouldn't be coming home.
Made a phone call, so then that sort of
tied him
to it. But everybody knew he was responsible for her disappearance, but they couldn't tie him to it.
Right. I mean, was the community kind of nervous though back then? I mean, I know.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it's hard to say the community was because you don't know whether some people even knew about it or read about it.
Right.
But the local citizens that you came in contact with every day and that you did business with were all concerned about it. And, they're looking, of course, to the sheriff's department, do something, solve this case, and to the state attorney's office. And, of course, Sexton was a very prominent citizen here.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that built the Ocean Grill. He built the patio. He built the Szechuan Palace. He built these, became famous restaurants. And he had lots of other things in the community he built. And he was a great historian. And he had a little bit of, a little bit of what I would call pull. And he was putting pressure on us all the time. And I knew Ralph real well. And he would call me up time to time. Any news on Judy? Have you heard anything? You got any idea what's going on? And naturally, I'd have to tell him, no, we still suspect that Gore's involved, but we just can't tie him to it.
And the sheriff's office actually even executed a search warrant in this case, where they found, they had blood on his clothing, they had a hair match in his car, but again, I mean, a hair match at the time, it's not like DNA.
Right.
A hair match really now is almost, it can be like almost debunked. Because it's
back then it was one of the few types of physical evidence that you could use. But since then, the reliability of it is not anywhere near like it was then.
Right. But still, it wasn't enough to...
Wouldn't be enough to prosecute him or arrest him.
Exactly, because you had no body.
Right, and you had nothing that would show that she in fact had been killed, and nothing that could link him to her at any time after she was last heard from until she went missing.
Because, even though you had him on the phone calling with her, he still could have said, yeah, I took her home and I dropped her off here and then I don't know what happened.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people don't realize how hard it is to actually get, a
lot of people think, well, you got a suspicion, you got the idea that the Owens girl, you got him tied to that, you suspect him in the Taiwanese girls, you know he was with her, that should be enough. Well, it's not.
It's not. It's
nowhere
not even
near
close.
Enough. You'd get laughed out of court if you took that to court.
Right. So finally, there ends up being a woman named Dana Sturgis, who, she's not a woman, she's a teenager. And Gore tries to use his power as an auxiliary deputy. He'd been kind of stalking her to lure her from her house. He said, there's been burglaries in your area. Why don't you, I need you to come with me to tell me, we think you're involved. So he tries to lure her down a dirt road, and it just, thank God for her, two fishermen actually see him with her, so he has to call it off because he's been seen. But she goes home and tells her parents, who are livid, obviously, and that's finally reported to the sheriff's office. So the sheriff's office finally fires him and strips him of his privileges.
Right.
And then with the Marilyn Owens case, he actually ends up being for the listeners, the woman we talked about with the doctor's office, where he's in the back of the car, shirtless with handcuffs, because that's normal. He was prosecuted for armed trespass.
Right.
I think the attorney that prosecuted him, I think it was Balsinger.
Balsinger, yeah. Jim Bossiger, who was one of my assistants at the time, he later became a county judge. Was county judge here for many years. He was the prosecutor in that case.
And, it's funny because reading the book about this case and doing some research, people don't realize they thought it was a really light sentence that Judge Vassell handed down. Judge Vassell actually gave him 5 years in prison. He served about 2.5 of it. But at the time, and even now, for someone without really a criminal, again, we have all these suspicions about him, but that's not a criminal history.
Yeah, you can't bring that out.
For what he did without a criminal history, that was a pretty good, I thought a pretty severe sentence. Me too. Even today.
And I thought Judge Vassell, who was a great judge incidentally.
Yes.
I thought he did the right thing there, and I thought it was a fair and adequate sentence.
So he goes away for 2.5 years, and again, I guess it was a kind of a pause on things, which is even more of an indication that he's probably involved. And in this time, Waterfield actually moves to Orlando for a bit with his, he had an auto repair shop. And finally, I think he got out in May of 1983 is when Gore got out of prison. And not long after that.
I was in the summer of '83.
Yes.
Yeah. I was in the hospital when it happened.
You were?
Yeah. I had some kind of weird flu. It wasn't a coronavirus. But I had some kind of weird flu, and my wife came and told me, said, Bob, Carl Elliott's daughter was murdered. And I checked myself out. I said, I've got to be there, so I was one of those prosecutors that I guess I was always looking for where the camera was. So I went to every murder crime scene myself, and so I had to get out, and actually because I knew Carl and liked Carl real well, and I wanted to be there for support for him. So that's when he killed the Elliott girl. It was in the summer of '83.
And actually, before the Elliott murders, the Elliott murder, that was when there was the two murders, Barbie Byer and
Angelica Lavelli.
Yes, and they were actually from Orlando area in Brevard, and they were hitchhiking. Just happened to be, on spring break. They were hitchhiking.
They were on the Orange Blossom Trail.
Yep.
In Orlando, and Gore and Waterfield, there's all kinds of timing things that happened. It worked out for us, but in the case, they had Waterfield's van, which had been in a body shop or repair shop in Fort Pierce, and Waterfield checked it out that day so they could make this little trip. They went to Daytona Beach and went around several places, and they ended up over in Orlando, and so they picked these two girls up. They brought them back to Vero Beach, sexually abused them, and then killed both of them, and actually chopped their bodies up. We found the pieces of bones on one of them. And,
on Barbie, eventually.
And the other girl, I think, was thrown in the canal, and didn't find any of her remains.
Right. And it's so bizarre because, it's very strange for a normal person to try and, obviously we hear about these things, but Gore wrote a series of letters later on to a prison pal named Tony Ciaglia, who then later wrote a book called The Serial Killer Whisperer, which, I read some of the letters that Gore wrote to him, and talking about the Byer and Lavelle murders, he said this: I drug both bodies into the woods where I disposed of them. Oh, and you can believe I collected hair. It took a couple days to recover from that. It was a perfect experience. Isn't that, it's chilling.
It is chilling, you think about it.
A perfect experience, and you think of these two 14-year-old girls just
Yeah.
Wrong time, wrong place, meeting a horrific end.
Yeah. Well, Gore confessed to those.
Yes.
And so Waterfield didn't. Actually, Waterfield is in prison now for life, and that was prosecuted him for Byers and Lavelli, and that was the
Life
case that he was convicted on. And we did that in Tavares on a change of venue.
So then, not long after, and you've already told us a little bit about it, was Lynn Elliott and Regan Martin. And really, I mean, the story of that case is so horrifying. It's almost like something from Saw. I mean, if you think about it. So, you know, I'll give you guys just a brief synopsis, and Bob can expound on what happened, but Waterfield's parents were out of town that weekend. Right. So Waterfield and Gore thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to, you know, kidnap some girls and take them to my parents' house and torture, rape them, and dismember them. So, you know, because that's what every...
It was Gore's parents.
Oh, it was Gore's parents' house.
They took him to Gore's house.
Okay. You know, that's just what you do, I guess, if you're that pair, for fun. And they just saw again, Lynn and Regan were just hitchhiking to the beach. They were trying to go to Wabasso Beach, and they came across Gore and Waterfield, who took them then to Gore's parents' house. But just by chance, on the way there, Fred passed his sister coming the other way. And his sister, you know, kind of saw them in the truck with the girls. So he got paranoid once they got to the house, you know, thinking, you know, my sister's gonna see me. So he went back to the shop. So during this time, Gore ties up both girls in separate rooms, rapes both of them, you know, and because it's just him, while he's raping Regan, Lynn was able to escape.
Yeah.
And she got out of the house, is running down this long driveway.
Right.
And imagine this. I mean, she's naked, she's bloody, she's tied up, she's just running, and Gore comes chasing after her. And he's a big guy.
Yeah,
I mean,
big
he's
guy.
6 feet, 270 pounds.
Yeah, big
this
guy.
naked, bloody, crazed man with a gun. And he just shoots her. She trips, he catches up to her and just shoots her.
And throws her in the trunk of his car, takes her back to the house.
And there just happened to be a little boy,
15-year-old boy,
riding his bike from school, and he saw this. I can't even imagine what it would be like to see this going down.
Yeah, he was on 15th Street Southwest, and Gore lived out next to the West Side Tennis Club out there. And I can't remember 38th, or I can't remember the street for sure. But at the end of that street, and all that property in there belonged to them, or wasn't developed. It's actually the housing developed there now, development. In fact, what's strange, David Morgan actually lived out there in one of those houses. But the kid saw, and Gore saw the kid on the bike and knew that he had seen him shoot her. And so the kid went on, and Gore couldn't chase him because he got away. So Gore then thought, uh-oh, he's going to call the police, and they're going to come out here. So Gore goes in, and he calls 911 and said, there's something strange going on outside of my house. I heard a gunshot, and there's somebody, I think there's somebody out there. And he was trying to, throw suspicion off himself. So when they found out who it was that called, they knew right away there wasn't somebody else. It just hit them immediately. There's something going on with David Gore.
And I even read a quote from Phil Redstone at the time saying, he just had a bad feeling something was going on that day, and he was actually kind of driving. And again, Vero's a super small town at this point. I mean, it's small now. Like the farthest I have to drive to go anywhere is Chick-fil-A, which is like 10 minutes. So,
do you go out there at night and get cookies?
I'm not getting cookies. I'm getting nuggets if I'm going out there. But I'm actually getting probably like a number one large if I actually make my way to Chick-fil-A. But I mean, Vero is a super small town, but he even said like he felt something was wrong that day. So police descend on this pretty quick.
Right.
And after like a brief, hour maybe standoff, they finally get him to come out. And then Regan is discovered, thank God, alive.
When the police got there, they were looking around as they should do, just a cursory search of the house, and they heard something in the attic. And so they opened the attic, went in, and Regan Martin was up there, a 14-year-old girl. She was up there naked, and she was beside herself. And what she went through was just nobody should have to go through. So they got her down, and she, of course, became a great witness for the state. She testified in Gore's case and testified also in Waterfield's 2 cases. He was tried twice, once in Punta Gorda and once in Tavares on changes of venue. So what she went through is just unbelievable.
At this time, you're in the hospital. And
I was in the hospital.
This is when you got the call and you went out.
Yeah, I got the call.
Did you already know Carl Elliott?
I knew Carl Elliott. Mm-hmm. He had a little TV repair shop, and he had repaired a TV for me. And so I didn't know him that well, but I knew him. And then I was told, I can't remember who told me, whether my wife told me or somebody called me and told me. But Bruce might have called me and told me, I'm not sure. But anyway, I called in the nurse, and I told her, I said, call my doctor. I want out of here. I'm getting out today. Mm-hmm. I've got something I got to do. So I got out and immediately went to out there and got with Redstone, and he filled me in on everything.
So were you then involved in any interrogation of Gore?
No.
That was all the...
Yeah, I when I first was elected, I got involved in an interrogation of a defendant in the case, a kid that had murdered a clerk down on Highlands Boulevard and US 1 at 7-Eleven down there, and it ended up being created problems when I prosecuted him.
Right.
And then we had to try to get the confession in, and so the judge. The defense lawyer wanted me to testify. He wanted to call me as a witness.
He's saying you're a witness, essentially.
And wanted me off the case, but the judge said no, and there happened to be a couple of other detectives there at the time. I actually took the guy's confession, but there were a couple other detectives there that the judge says, well, they can testify and get the confession in. So after that, I never got involved in it.
Right, just to not create problems, make it clean. So because I know you ended up prosecuting Gore,
right,
for first degree murder on the Elliott case. And that had to be moved to St. Pete for a change of venue.
St. Petersburg, right.
And essentially a change of venue occurs when, for example, it's a very small town. Everyone in the community at that point knew what happened. The judge basically has to find that there's too many people, it's been too highly publicized. There's no way to have a fair trial in, our jurisdiction. So they move it to a different jurisdiction where people might not know as much. So you went and tried the case in St. Pete.
Right.
And who tried it with you?
Jimmy Medelis tried it with me.
Who eventually became a circuit judge.
No, he became a county judge.
County judge.
County judge. In fact, at the time, he was my chief trial assistant.
Like chief deputy?
He was...
Chief trial assistant.
Yeah, he was a prosecutor.
Right,
And I tried several murder cases, and he was always with me on all of them.
So how did the trial go in St. Pete?
Well, it went real well. I mean, it was a very smooth trial. He was defended by Ken Phillips and Jim Long, who's an attorney here in Vero now. Ken's retired. Ken was, after that, Ken was with the public defender's office at the time. And
I know Jim. I mean, I worked with Jim a lot.
Yeah. So they represented him, and No hitches in the trial.
So the jury then found recommended death 11-1.
Right.
So I can't believe one person thought he should live.
I can't either. I don't. I never understood that.
So the deal, and then you ended up making a deal with him for the other cases.
Yeah,
So tell us how that kind of came about.
Well, they came and approached us, and his lawyer did, and said, "Look, if you won't seek the death penalty, which is what we wanted, you only put somebody to death once.
Right.
So he will tell you about some other crimes." So I entered into agreement. I said, "Sure, if he'll confess to other crimes and tell us where the bodies are, so we can find these people,
And bring the victims comfort.
we get put closure for some
answers.
people, especially the sextons. Then we won't seek the death penalty. He can plead guilty to first-degree murder for life sentences."
Mm-hmm.
So I think he actually had about 5 life sentences and 1 death penalty. So that's how we found out. That's how we found out about Judy K. Daly. That's how we eventually found a part of her body. That's how we found out about the Taiwanese girls, and we found their bodies buried in the orange grove in 2 55-gallon drums. And that's how we found out about Byers and Lavelli. And he actually took us to where the Byers girls' remains were. So that's why we made that deal, and that solved
5 other
5 other cases
homicides.
for us.
Now, I know we were talking about it a little before, but how did you feel? Because he went out there with you, right?
Right.
How was it like looking at someone like this? I mean,
Well,
how was he when he was describing where these things were?
As I was telling you earlier, I've been doing this a long time. I've tried a bunch of murder cases and met some really gory people and some weird people. And believe it or not, Schaefer, which we could talk about another time, was worse than Gore. But we were out at the Grove looking for the drums, digging up to try to find the Taiwanese mother and daughter. And he was out there with us because he showed us where they were buried. And I was standing beside him, talking to him. And he turned and looked at me. And I looked in his eyes. And they were like a devil's eyes. I mean, they were red. I don't think his eyes regularly were red, but that particular time. And he had this glassy-eyed look. And I thought I could see to the back of his head, see right through his eyes. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I remember I turned and told one of the guys standing with me, I said, "This guy is definitely demon-possessed. There's no question about it in my mind."
I think some people are just born with that
I
evil.
mean, you
Not
read,
like as an excuse,
you read the
but they're
Bible
just a
all the
bad
time
person.
about people who are demon-possessed and how the Lord called on demons to come out of people, and they jumped into hogs and did all kinds of things. But I believe it. I believe this guy was demon-possessed. I don't think there's any question about it.
And talking more about Waterfield, because Gore is the one that eventually was executed by the state and got the death penalty. Waterfield was tried in the Elliott murder, and he ended up, tell us how he got a manslaughter sentence.
Well, he got a manslaughter. The case was changed to Punta Gorda, Florida. So we went over there and we picked the jury. And Waterfield was represented by paid counsel. He had Michael Bloom out of Miami, who was a very good trial lawyer. And so we tried that case, and there was some problems with the case because, as we said, in the Elliott case, Waterfield always tried to be the nice guy. When Reagan Martin testified, all she could say was that he was nice and that she wasn't really afraid of him. And she never saw him after she got to the house because he left, so she never saw him with any perform any sexual acts on her. And a strange thing happened. Waterfield had testified to the grand jury, which is unusual for it. Mm-hmm. And of course, naturally, he his testimony was all self-serving.
Right.
And during the deliberations of the jury, we had his grand jury transcript there, but we didn't admit it in evidence because we didn't want it in evidence.
Because it was all self-serving.
All self-serving. One of the jurors asked the bailiff, what about his grand jury testimony? You have a copy of that. The bailiff goes over to the clerk's desk, picks it up, and gives it to the jury.
Oh, my gosh.
With no lawyers there, no judge. He just does it on his own. And boy, when we found out about it, we were livid. I said, I can't believe this. We tried to get a mistrial and everything, but we couldn't. But anyway, they found him guilty of manslaughter. So
he got sentenced to 15 years on that case.
15 years, that was the maximum he could get, was 15 years.
And then I want to talk about the deal that you made with him on the Laval and Bayer case, the two 14-year-old girls from the Brevard area. And I want to talk about this because I think I've dealt with this as a prosecutor, not on the level that Mr. Stone has, obviously, because I've never tried a murder case or anything like that. But there's a balance you have to kind of decide in your head when you are making deals with defendants. And you might have a defendant that you absolutely despise that's done horrific things like Fred Waterfield. And you just have this burning desire to, just go gung-ho, prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. But there might be problems in the case. And you have to think in your head and make that decision, what is best, put your own kind of wishes and your pride aside and decide what's best for the community. Like, how can I make sure the community is the safest? So tell us about kind of how that is in a trial of this magnitude.
Well, yeah, you've got to make a decision because you got so many factors in a trial, especially a murder trial, where people are, and if it's a death penalty case, jurors are overly sensitive about it. And so you've got to look and see what you think you can prove and what you can't. You can't do what you want to. I certainly, because we didn't seek the death penalty on the Byers and Valley girl in Tavares. We tried that case in Tavares for several reasons. One, we sought the death penalty in Punta Gorda, and they found him guilty of manslaughter. And we're not so sure that because they thought about the evidence maybe not being as strong as it should be or they were expecting, that, well, if we vote to convict this guy of murder, he may get the death penalty. We don't want to be part of that. So we decided not to seek the death penalty for several reasons. In a death penalty case, you have to prove aggravating circumstances. You have to prove it's a cruel and heinous crime. You have to prove it's cold and calculated. You have to prove that it was done either for money or done to avoid somebody testifying against them, all kinds of things that are listed you have to prove. Well, we really didn't have evidence of any of those in the Bayer and Lavelli case against Waterfield because we didn't have an eyewitness of Reagan Martin in that case. We only had Gore's testimony. And we were going to use, Gore actually testified for the state. And so we knew that if Gore testifies and their likelihood of him getting the death penalty is very slim. And we might get a jury oversensitive if we qualify him for a death penalty case. So we decided not to seek the death penalty. In Waterfield's case, what we wanted was a conviction of first-degree murder. And we thought that the chances were much, much greater of getting that type of verdict if we didn't seek the death penalty. A lot of people criticized us for it, saying, well, Gore got the death penalty, Waterfield's just as much involved. That may have been true, but the question is, what evidence and what proof do you have of that? That's what people feel like or what somebody might have said, but in my opinion, there wasn't sufficient evidence for us to seek the death penalty against Waterfield in the Byers and Lavelli case. So I made a decision not to seek the death penalty, and he was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 2 life sentences.
And I mean, just
jurors, I mean, just in the jury selection process, a death penalty jury selection can take a month in and of itself.
It takes a long time.
Just of jury selection.
You have to ask people.
You have to qualify for death.
You have to ask people how they feel about the death penalty, they believe in it. Would you, under any circumstances, vote to impose the death penalty? And you'd be surprised at the number of people who say no. They can't think of any circumstance in which they would vote to put somebody to death.
Right. I mean, Ted Bundy was 10-2.
Yeah.
It wasn't unanimous. So, and the law changed a couple years ago. Thank God it was after Gore's execution, but they changed it to now the death penalty has to be unanimous. So,
well, I think they've changed it back. Somebody said that there was a recent case where they thought that standard was too high.
No, I'll have to look into that. I didn't know that.
I can't.
I'll ask Robin.
That's
She'll
what
know.
I heard.
Okay.
I may have heard it from Robin. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
So the last thing I want to talk to you about, you went to Gore's execution in 2012.
right.
Was that the first and only execution you've attended?
Yes.
How was the experience?
Well, it's hard to describe. First, it wasn't what I expected in any way. It was very, very sterile, and what happens is you get there, and they've got a room with maybe 15, 20 chairs. They let the family in first, and they're on the front row. There's a big glass window there, and there's a shade covering the window. You can't see anything behind the window. Then they let other people like prosecutors and other interested witnesses in next. I actually sat on the front row with Carl Elliott. And then on the back row, they let the press in. So then they close the door, and the curtain goes up. And there is Gore laying on a gurney with, wires and tubes and things in him. And he's laying back, and your feet are facing you. All you can see is his feet. Mm-hmm. You can't even see his face.
You can't see his face or anything?
Oh, no. And he's there, and over on the, there's a door on the right in the back, and then the superintendent of the prisons, DOC superintendent, comes in and says, "We're here to carry out the sentence in the case of State of Florida versus David Allen Gore." And then we don't see anything, and they're, I guess, are putting in the chemicals into the tubes. We don't see a thing, and then he goes over and looks at him a couple times, and then a doctor comes in, goes over, looks at him, examines him. The doctor walks out, and then the superintendent of the prison says, "The sentence in the case of State of Florida versus David Allen Gore has been carried out." At 6:10 p.m., curtain comes down, and that's it.
Did he say any last words or anything?
I think he said something. I can't remember what it was. It was just
Dribble.
But what upset me about it was nobody likes to see somebody killed. I'm not what you say a real religious person, but I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. And I think the Lord's the one that's responsible for death. But I do think that the death penalty is legal, and I do think that my religion condones it. But the one thing I would like to have seen is him have to look Carl Elliott and Mrs. Elliott, Jeannie Elliott, in the face. I felt like he should have to look at them and see them.
Right.
And they see him. But they didn't. All they saw was his bottoms of his feet. And to me, that was, it was just too sterile for me. And,
I mean, again, and I talk about this, it's like what happened with Regan Martin. There are things that are worse than death. And what Regan Martin went through, I personally think is worse than just being shot point blank in the head.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what that girl and now woman has had to live with and probably deal with her entire, I mean, I can't imagine the fear that would possess you every day And really, to be killed that humanely, I think, is almost, for the family, it's like, is that even fair that he got to die that easily?
To them, Carl said, well, closure's here, but not really.
Right.
Not really,
I mean, there's still an emptiness. And
I saw Reagan, incidentally, at the execution. She was there, and she's trying to be a very nice young lady. Well, she's not young anymore. That was 37 years ago. So, and she was 14. She's 51 years old now. And her mother was there, and of course, Lavelli and Byers' family was also there, even though that wasn't their case. It was an Elliott case, but they were there, and and it was nice talking to them. And but that's one I did want to miss. I'm not excited about seeing the death penalty, or you couldn't be, but I wanted to see that because of what he did and to those women. He deserved it.
And I think Robin actually shared this with me, but I know that you, and this is something as a prosecutor, again, I have not tried any of the cases to the magnitude that you have, but you do get connected to the victims. And I'm sure, especially in a case like this, Robin shared with me that you actually went to go visit Lynn.
Yeah, I went to the cemetery and talked to her. Excuse me.
Oh no, it's okay.
I told her, I said, we got justice for you. It was a tough case.
And I mean, I think that's why, you've always been one of my heroes, and why all the state attorneys that try cases like this are heroic to me, because a lot of people don't understand that you take it home. I mean, how could you ever forget that?
Well, you can't.
And you feel responsible for getting justice.
I felt all along, I felt like, I've got a responsibility to not just the community, but to Carl and Jeannie Elliott, what they went through to lose a young daughter like that under these circumstances, that I felt like that every bit of ability that I had, I needed to use it for them.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for your service to the community. Thank you for being such a good friend to me and a mentor, and for sharing this with us. I think it's an important story that needs to be told for the victims, and thank God there are people like Bob and his daughter Robin, and now Robbie, his son, is a prosecutor, and that do this for the community and carry out justice. So,
well, thank you for having me here, Sam. You've always been one of my favorite people.
Oh,
I know we tried a DUI case one time.
We did. It was so much fun.
Some crazy guy who hated me.
He did hate you. He liked me better than you, and I was prosecuting him.
I'll never forget that case.
No.
We had an argument about a piece of evidence, you remember.
Oh, yeah.
The 911 tape. He said, I want that 911 tape entered in evidence, and I didn't want to enter it because on the 911 tape, he confesses.
You did.
So I told him, I said, I'm not going to offer an evidence. And you remember, we had to because he spoke out. And I told the judge, I'm offering this in evidence because he wants it. It's against my better judgment. And I don't know whether that's what swayed the jury, but if they hadn't been positive then.
I don't think the jury even heard you say that.
Yeah, that would have sealed it right there for them.
That was only like the second case I tried too, and I'm going, what's happening here? Yeah. That was fun. That was a fun
Robbie
one.
and I were arguing with him. And,
I know. Robbie was really trying.
He said, "No, you don't want that in there. That's gonna give me. I want that 911 tape in. That's gonna exonerate me." Okay. All right, and I told the judge, I said, we're offering an evidence against my advice and judgment. And so I got in, and that was a coup de grace.
Great.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me see if I
Well,
can
that's a wrap.
This episode was hosted and written by Sam Whitley and produced by Jared Blaze of Argonaut Marketing. In this episode, I relied on my source, Mr. Stone, for a lot of the historical background, as well as the book The Killing Cousins, The True Story of the Slaying Cousins, a Jack Rosewood story.